Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K. On this episode, I speak to Rob Urbinati of the Canadian death thrash metal act Sacrifice. The band released their first album in 16 years, Volume 6, yesterday, and it's a cracker. Before I get into my chat with Rob, I'd like to play a track from another act from Toronto, PHEAR. The band have released their second full-length album, Save Our Souls, via Golden Robot Records digitally. The album was produced, mixed and mastered by John Harvard from Threat Signal. Here's the track from it, Snake. And that was Snake by PHEAR of their album Save Our Souls. The band features Alex Zubair on guitars, who was formerly of Nephelium, and Nephelium are a band from UAE that have come up in multiple conversations when I've talked about the scene from the early 2000s and further. Do check out Save Our Souls, leaving a link to it in the show notes. And now for my chat with Rob Urbinati of Sacrifice. Here it is. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me, man.
So, you know, first of all, it's great speaking to you. And, it's awesome that Sacrifice has a new album out because we're talking ahead of your first album release in over 16 years, which is Volume 6, which is going to be out via Cursed Blessing and High Roller Records. First of all, how does it
Yes.
feel that, there's new music out, you're doing press for it?
Yeah, it's like I mean, 16 years, it doesn't feel like that long, really. I mean, we've been we're not the most active band, but we do play live every year. Like, except for the pandemic, obviously, we weren't playing live, but we've been active the pretty much the whole time. And yeah, it's when I think back, that was 16 years ago. It's crazy. Um, but yeah, it's exciting for us. Like I guess any band will tell you this when you get in the studio and you record an album. Um, the hard part is after it's done, you have about 6 7 months to wait until it comes out, and you just want people to hear it, right? So you're excited for everyone to hear it. Yeah, so yeah, we're just waiting to for this album to come out. We just want everybody to hear it at this point. It's been a long time sitting on it.
Okay, that's very interesting, right? Because, there's been talk about a new Sacrifice album, and I must give a huge shout out to, everyone in the Facebook group because I think like the amount of excitement over there, and I've been part of that, I think, for over a decade. And like every time we'd see like pictures of recording or someone or the other, I mean, names are kind of eluding me at the moment, but you know who keeps
Actually, I'm
showing
not
up,
on
or there'll be
Facebook, so
always be like,
I don't really know, but yeah.
oh,
But the rest of the band is.
okay. Yeah. So it's always cool just to see like, hey, someone's posted like queries, and I think the rest of the guys like Gus and everyone is quite active on Facebook
Oh
there,
yeah, I
so
hear
that's
about it all
cool.
the
But
time.
you, so this is your second album since
hmm
reforming, so to say, in 2006. How different was the writing process for Volume 6 compared to the ones that I condemn?
Well, it wasn't that different other than, once we started to gain some traction, like I think it was around 2017, I'd sent a couple of songs around to the guys, one the opener on the album Comatose and another song Missile, and everybody really liked it, and we felt like we had a direction we wanted to go in. And yeah, so we started going to rehearsal, getting songs tight, continue writing, and then the pandemic hit. So that really put a dent in our rehearsal. Like, the city was pretty much shut down. We couldn't really rehearse for a while. Um, and that whole pandemic time, it just wasn't the most creative time for me anyway. I hear it from other musicians too. It just seemed like your creativity dries up as you're not having any life experience. You're just, you know, trying to keep yourself entertained at home and that kind of thing. So, um, we were planning, I think before the pandemic, we were planning on doing maybe an EP or a mini album. But, once our creativity came back and the rehearsing started again, everything started coming together pretty quick after that. And yeah, we said, hey, we have enough material. Let's shoot for an album, a full length album here. So that's what we did. And we finally booked some studio time, got in and banged it out. And yeah, we're 100% happy with what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that would be one of the silver linings, right? Like now all the fans get like more music to kind of enjoy. But I want to like take a few steps back also, right? I mean, I remember when Sacrifice reunited, you all did the show together, and then was there plans once you'll put out the ones that I condemn to record more music? I mean, if you had to go back to a moment, I mean, you mentioned Comatose, but was there a thing that kind of sparked off what now we hear as Volume 6?
Um, no, I mean, for a band like us, like we don't do this full time, right? Like we have jobs and families and regular lives like everybody. So this isn't our full-time gig. Um, so doing an album for us is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for a band if they're, you know, doing it full time. But yeah, just to get everything written, rehearsed, and all that stuff. Uh, Once we did the ones I condemn, I think we felt like yeah, we wanted to do another record at some point, but we don't put any pressure on ourselves. Like the main thing in this band for us is we want to keep it. We don't want it to be a job. This is um, we want it to be enjoyable for everybody in the band. So yeah, we don't really put any pressure on ourselves. We like to go out, play some shows. Do that kind of thing. We like enjoy rehearsal and all that. But we just figure if there is another album in our future, it'll come to us and it'll happen. If not, it won't happen. So once we did get those first couple of songs written, it started rolling. But yeah, we didn't really have any concrete plans as far as more recording goes.
And I think that's a very different approach, right? Because I feel like with most bands that I speak to, uh, the reason you go out on tour is because you have new music. So there's always that thing of putting out new music so you can
Right.
tour. And it's the entire cycle every 2 to 3 years
Yes.
again, right? Uh, but was that a conscious call that all of you took when you all decided to reunite? Because one of the advantages, actually, or one of the things is it's the same members that were there originally in Sacrifice, right? You'll have stuck to the same lineup
Yes.
and all of that. So was that one of a very clear understanding that you
Yeah, I
had?
think like when we got back together to do a show in 2006, our first three albums just got re-released. So there's a bit of excitement around that. And we were doing that reunion show in 2006. We were really nervous. Like we hadn't played live for, I think it was 17 years. So um, we didn't really have any kind of roadmap. We just thought, let's do the show. We all wanted to get back on stage again. We did it. And I think it was right after the show that same night, I said, hey, do you guys want to try writing an album? And everybody was on board. So that was our roadmap. We've just always done what feels right. And we don't have the pressure. Like I know a lot of, like you said, a lot of bands you talk to, they have the cycle they go through. Um, yeah, we don't have that. I mean, the other part of it is, we're an older band. We've been around since the '80s, and usually when we play live, people want to hear our first three albums, and we don't really have to do an album. People will book us to play on, our older stuff, but we still have this in us, and we just, if we have the music in us and we feel comfortable, we're confident in the songs, yeah, we want to release it.
Okay, I'm gonna like pause you on the entire part of your approach and your comeback because I have like other questions on that slightly
Okay.
later on, right? Uh, but at this point, I think let's play a song from Volume 6 for everyone tuned in so far. Just kind of help you choose a track from the album. Why don't we kind of play a track which kind of set off what the sonic template for Volume
Yeah,
6 is?
sure. I One of my favorite songs on the album, if not my favorite, is the opener, Comatose. Um, that song is, I think, for any Sacrifice fan that's been there from the beginning, they will hear this song and say, "Yes, this is what I'm looking for." Like this is Sacrifice. It's fast, it's powerful. There's tremolo picked riffs. There's that whole aggressive Sacrifice is embodied in this song. So, yeah, I'm gonna pick that one as the opener.
Awesome. Here it is.
Infected wounds, our life consumes. Self-inflict, your own burdens. No breaking free, mandatory. You can't deny, you must comply. You fell down, you will drown. Comatose, life of regrets, rushing roulette. Turn your back, constant attack became a need. The needle bleeds, you can't deny, you must comply. You fell down, you will drown. Compelled to survive, barely alive. Comatose. Look out! Look out! Look out! The stage is set, the lies you wept, the thoughts you broke, the words you spoke. Alone you lie, waiting to die, held as captive, no way to live. You fell down, you will drown, compelled to die, barely alive. Comatose.
And that was Sacrifice with Comatose of their latest album, Volume 6. And I've got Rob with me. Now, another question I had for you, and I was very curious, uh, you know, about what you were talking about, right? Where, because even the press note very clearly talks about, you saying your creativity kind of dried up and how you had to kind of
Mhm.
deal with that. Uh, but for anyone tuned in right now, right, whether they're a musician or a creative of any sort, what would you kind of say to them? Or, I mean, not like give them methods or ways, but what kind of advice would you kind of give them if they're facing a block of a similar
Well, I
sort?
mean, for music, for me, like I'm pretty creative person. Like, I mean, I if I'm not writing music, I've got a sketchbook out and doing that or whatever. I like to create things, and especially for music, I feel like if I have a block or I'm just not feeling creative, I'll do some music, but it'll be something completely different. Like I'll get out my keyboard and just write some kind of like sci-fi soundtrack kind of thing that's just completely different than what I'd normal like, I'm used to plugging my guitar in and hammering out metal riffs, but sometimes I feel like I need to just cleanse my brain with something completely different. And I don't know, I find that helps. I guess even like, a lot of times I'll open up my sketchbook and, you stare at a blank page. Sometimes I'll just put a couple of lines on the paper and just see where it goes. Sometimes you just need to, I just feel like I need to just not think and just let things happen. And I think a lot of musicians will tell you there's a lot of times like your best songs feel like you're almost not writing it yourself. Like it's coming from somewhere else, and that does happen. I've heard a lot of musicians say the same thing, and you can't really put yourself there. It just has to happen. You just have to keep at it, and one day that lightning will strike, and you'll get a song out or whatever art or creative thing you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, I think like there was a musician I spoke to a while back who said it's like you just hold your guitar and you're waiting for like this to tap into something, and it just once it flows, right? You know it, and it's about being there at the right time, and being prepared, right? That's more important than
Hmm.
anything else. And I think that's been the best way. The more musicians and more creative people I talk to, it kind of gets confirmed that there is no kind of method, so to say, right? Like you can't just sit in front of your guitar and say, okay, today I'm going to write like 5 songs. It doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, you can't. It doesn't work that way. A lot of times, I just plug my guitar in, and I'll stumble across a cool riff I made up, and I'll just work around that. Just see where that goes. Sometimes it goes somewhere good. Sometimes it's like I'll listen to it the next day and think, ah, it's not that great.
Okay, cool. So you also co-produced
Yeah,
Volume
sure.
6. Now, as you mentioned earlier, there is an audience that knows the Sacrifice sound. They come back for those songs itself of the first 3 albums, right? Was there something that you wanted to try different sonically on Volume 6? Or you were like, you know what, if it's not broken, let's not fix it?
Well, I think that, we know what we do best, right? We know we feel like when we want to play aggressive, fast music. There are times where I'll write music and I'll start it and think like I'm not really sure this is a Sacrifice song, but the more I get into it, I might think like yeah, this is a Sacrifice song. And yeah, we don't it comes natural for us. Like we've been playing since we were kids, we started this band we're basically kids. And yeah, we just this is what we want to do. We just feel like everybody wants to do what they do best, right? Sometimes it works out for you, sometimes it doesn't, but we just really feel like this band is, the four of us fit together well, um, and we know how each other plays, and we kind of use that to create our songs, I guess. We know each other musically so well that that's where this music goes.
Yeah. And just to kind of wrap up the questions I had on the album itself, I noticed like the last track, Trapped in a World, is a cover actually that you'll have done of a hardcore act called Direct Action. And the press release says that they've had a
Right.
massive influence on you all in your formative years. Now, I wasn't familiar with the band, so I kind of looked them up and I realized they're from St. Catharines and moved to Toronto. And actually, Trapped in a World is their only release that they did. Uh, what can you tell us about them? I mean, for those who are curious about that band.
Um, Back when we were young, Uh, there wasn't many bands like us around to go see live. You had the option of you could go see, um, like glam rock was exploding in Toronto and well everywhere in North America, I guess. And so we had the option to go see those bands, or you know, we could go see hardcore bands that were more like we were. They were fast and powerful, music. So we would go see those bands. The Direct Action was my favorite band. Joe and I used to go down and see them pretty much every time they played, for a while. And yeah, you know, they were our favorite local band, I think, at the time. And yeah, I don't know what sparked the idea to do a Direct Action cover, but yeah, we thought, yeah, let's try it, and it seemed to fit well. Like, we um, picked it up at rehearsal pretty quick. And for vocals too, we had a guest vocalist on it, which was Brian Taylor, who was our producer on our first three records. Big, like monumental in the history of Sacrifice. We probably would have never done anything without him. We recorded our first demo with him. Like I said, our first three albums, and he was pretty much like a part of the band. And anybody that was in Toronto back then knows exactly who he is. He had a record store. He worked at a record store called the Record Peddler, and he had a radio show too that, anybody into hardcore metal back then would listen to that. So, he was pretty well known in the city back then for sure.
Okay, and I think that that's a great segue into the next part I wanted to talk to you about, right? Is a few years ago, Razor released a new album. And as I mentioned to you at the
Mhm.
start of before we hit record, that I actually lived in Toronto about 20 years ago. And I have to give a huge shout out to, and I think you're familiar with her, Miss Barbara Fish. She used to run a radio show called Satan Takes a
Yes.
Holiday on
Hmm.
CKLN. And it was like the graveyard shift, right? Like 3 a.m. Uh, at the University of Toronto, she would run it. And I think that's the first time I came across Sacrifice. And that kind of sent me down this kind of rabbit hole where, okay, who's this band? What are they doing? And how come I've never heard of them? And then I kind of found out that there was reissues happening of your album. I actually own one of the copies. I don't think you can see it. Hold up. I need to show you the. Yeah, yeah.
I can see
I
it.
think you've seen the too many of these, right? So I actually recently got Soldiers of Misfortune uh, High Roller Records, right? So again,
Yeah.
coming back to my question, right? You have, and when I was looking it up, there was bands like Razor, there was Slaughter, there was you guys. There was a completely different scene back in Toronto, and this was around also the same time that you had the entire movement of thrash happening in San Francisco and the Bay Area. Paint a picture for those like who are completely like unaware. What was it like kind of growing up at that time? You said there was hardcore. I mean, it's clear influence on your music itself, right? But what was it like growing up back then in Toronto and playing metal?
It was pretty exciting, even like before we even played live. I'm sure you've heard, like, back in those days, you know, obviously no internet and stuff. We would trade tapes all over the world. Like, these bands that came out around the same time as us, we would record demos before our album was out, and those would get traded around the world. You get it like a fifth generation tape. They'd start to sound kind of shitty after a while, but you didn't care. Like, this was kind of new music. No one had really. I guess we were all looking for. We were all listening to metal. We'd, Maiden, Priest, Def Leppard, or whatever back in those days, and you were always looking for something a little bit heavier, a little bit faster, and then you'd come across like Venom, and Metallica, and then Slayer came out, and it seemed like what everyone was looking for. So we were all pretty young. When we first started playing live, I think one of our first shows was Razor, Sacrifice, and Slaughter, and that's when it felt like you know there were Toronto bands, like there was a Toronto scene happening. um yeah, just we were all really young, and yeah, we go back a long way with Razor. Like, we've played a lot of shows with those guys over the years, and we've been playing with them right from the very beginning. So yeah, it was all I can say is it was really exciting. No one really had, I don't think any of us really had any ambition to be, any massive band. The music was so underground and just abrasive. You couldn't imagine that this music would ever get big. If you can understand that, it's just too extreme for people. And we were happy having our little, we could play a show and have 300 people there or whatever. That's all we needed. And I've been asked before, like, what were your goals back then? And our goals were to play at Larry's Hideaway, the shitty bar downtown. That was that was our goal when we got together. And obviously we wanted to put a record out, but there was no one was under the illusion that you'd sell like hundreds of thousands of records and gold records and that kind of thing. We couldn't even imagine back then that Metallica and Slayer would get as big as they are. Today Metallica is probably biggest rock band in the world. But you have to understand, when Kill 'Em All came out, it was like it was crazy. You couldn't imagine them ever getting big, but they did. So yeah, it was really exciting times back then.
Yeah, and another band actually I mentioned is where I think we met very briefly was Pile Driver, right? And rest in peace, God.
Mm-hmm.
It was also interesting just to see that kind of side also, because Pile Driver was this nameless or faceless act that you didn't know about. And then suddenly they came live, and
Yeah.
seeing that, the entire show and stuff like that. Like, I'm very fortunate I managed to see them live at least once. Because anyone who's ever been to a Pile Driver, which was later the Exalted Pile Driver show, you knew it was quite a performance, right? It wasn't just your run of the mill show at all.
Oh, absolutely. And the crazy thing was that I didn't even have any sort of conversation with Gord until, like, probably well into the 2000s. Um, yeah, because they didn't really play live. So I don't think I met him until, yeah, the 2000s. So, um, yeah, everybody knew who Pile Driver was, but, like you said, they were kind of like an elusive band. They didn't really play live much, if at all. So, um, and there were other bands too that came up. There's, a band called Death Militia, um, Overthrow. There's a lot of Toronto bands that just didn't get their due, but they're really good bands. Dark Legion, and plus all the hardcore bands like Sudden Impact, Direct Action, uh, Negative Gain. There's so many bands here. Um, yeah, it was just like I've said a couple times now, it was just exciting times to be around.
And for anyone curious, I think, like, for me, I've heard some of these names because there was an entire blogspot era of the internet where people were suddenly realizing that no one had heard of these bands, and were like uploading their CDs or finding like tapes, and they were converting them into digital and uploading them. So I remember there was a
Yeah.
Toronto Thrash blogspot, which I'm not sure if it's still active, but they have like a
Mhm.
lot of like these bands that you're talking about. But one good thing is, I think with Slaughter, is there's always a label reissuing their albums. So I think Stopado and I can't remember, Incinerator, all of those are always in circulation. So if you're curious about them also, you can find their music around. Uh, Razor.
Oh yeah, I can talk about Slaughter too. Like I mean, they don't get enough credit really because I remember when the Swedish death metal scene started happening, people credit that, that Swedish death metal guitar sound. And I mean, that was Slaughter's guitar sound. You know, I think they invented that guitar sound. So yeah, I don't think they get enough credit for what they did. They're, I think still a very underground band, but the people, I think any death metal band, all those Swedish death metal bands, I guarantee they love Slaughter. So
Yeah, what was that opening? I can't remember. It was like one, two, fuck you, something like.
one, two, yeah, yeah, one, two,
I
fuck
think
you,
I think
yeah,
like
that's what
everyone
it
has
was.
kind of, and
Yeah.
then you just have that like n- guitar, yeah, which is I think so like I mean, of course, I think I heard it on other bands, but yeah, definitely. Like now that you're saying it, like these guys have all just like taken off Slaughter completely.
Yeah, we used to, yeah, and I mean, we were great friends with those guys back in those days. We used to play a lot of shows together, and just even on the weekends, we'd hang out together. So, yeah.
Thanks, Rob, for kind of painting that picture for us, right? Because I think like it's important, especially to kind of remember what it was like back in the 80s. And I think, especially for now that we have a generation that's kind of grown up on the internet, they can't even fathom the fact that you had to,
Hmm.
like, I don't know, send a self addressed envelope halfway around the world and just wait for months till a tape shows up or doesn't show up. Right.
Yeah, it was literally like that. Like you had, there were people that you'd get in touch with. I can't even remember how you'd find these people, but you'd find some guy in Florida that had lots of demos. And so you'd record some, Toronto bands, send it down to him. He'd send you back a tape. Or you could just, ask him, hey, do you have this, possessed demo? Do you have this nasty savage demo? And he'd send you these demos. And it was so exciting. You'd get this cassette and you'd put it in. And like, I mean, if I was to listen to it today, I'd be like, it would just be so much hiss on the tape. And but that's how hungry we were for this music, right? There wasn't that many records out. You know, you had, I guess, like the big four that people call them today. They would have records out. Everybody else didn't have records out. They were still doing demos, so it was, yeah. You couldn't wait to get these tapes. Then your friend would call you, "Hey, I got this tape. Come over." So yeah, it was crazy because now you can go on the internet, you can go on YouTube and find anything, or on Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever. The whole catalog of human recorded music ever made is on there, right? It's a totally different world today.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's also interesting, right? Because I think you may remember this time where, because I remember reading it, where a lot of times, like, because bands went through that entire demo phase and they put out like multiple demos, by the time it came to the album, the sound was different and people were so used to listening to it a certain way, right? They were like, wait, why does it sound so
Yeah.
pristine or so clear and all of that?
Yeah, it happened to us actually. We demoed some songs for the For Determination album, and we did it in like a day. We just went into someone's basement studio in the middle of July. I remember it was super hot, and we just recorded a bunch of songs really quick. We just wanted to demo them, see how they'd sound in a studio. And Brian, that I'd mentioned before, that sang on Trapped in a World, he played a song or two on his radio show. Then when it came time to do the album, people were so used to hearing that shitty demo that they it was like, this isn't as powerful as the demo. Like it was a lot more powerful, but you're just used to hearing that shitty hissy demo.
Yeah, and I also have to say, right, there was a time where people would actually tape off radio shows there, and I
Oh
think
yeah,
if I'm, if I'm not
we all did it.
mistaken, someone has, or I mean, I can't remember. Did you all ever play live on some of the shows? Because I know there were at least interviews or something in Toronto, and my brain is kind of frazzled now.
Yeah, yeah, we would have probably done some interviews, but no, we I don't think we've ever
Yeah,
played
but
live on
someone's
the
basically
radio.
like taped a lot of this, and so you kind of like have like a moment in time kind of captured like what are the bands then, which if I have to kind of fast forward to slightly closer in time, right? Uh, since you said that all you all wanted to do was play at Larry's Hideaway, when you kind of put went on hiatus, so to say, or put sacrifice to rest, what was it like in the mid 2000s to realize that there were so many people now, thanks to the internet and all of that kind of, who actually listen to Sacrifice? I mean, like I showed you a little while back. I mean, halfway around the world right now, I have an album that you recorded. I don't know when was Soldiers of Misfortune recorded, like late.
I think that was like
Yeah, yeah,
1989,
yeah. I
1990,
mean, like I
around
have a
then.
CD of that.
Yeah,
How does that feel? Like, what is that coming back to all of that?
it's hard to, you don't always sit in like appreciate that this has happened, like that someone halfway around the world has your record. Like, sometimes you really need to sit and think about this. Like when we did our reissues around 2006, there was a label called Marquee Records in Brazil, and the guy that ran the label, his name was Armando, and I used to talk to him on the phone a lot. He would tell me the story about when he was young in Brazil, and to get a Sacrifice album, he had to save up for so long and order it, I think, from Europe. And it took, I can't remember how long he told me to get it, but he said it was like one of the happiest moments of his life when he got that record in the mail finally, and, to think of how easy things are now. And plus, back then, too, we didn't have like, I couldn't interact with somebody from Mumbai in, 1987, right? So, it's pretty amazing today that I can talk to you and do an interview for a podcast like this. So it is like we never forget how lucky we are. People say, "Wow, you guys could have got a lot bigger. I wish you guys would have got a break." But I mean, we're happy with where we are. We've had fans the whole way. Even through that whole um, early '90s thing where people weren't listening to thrash anymore. Maybe for a couple of years they didn't listen to it, but a couple of years later they're, wanting to sacrifice reissues again. So we're very fortunate to be able to keep our audience for so long. And, here I am, in my 50s, and we still have fans from a band I started, with Joe when we were like 16 years old. So we do feel very lucky.
Yeah, and I think also the fact that I'm sure now that y'all are playing shows, you also see some old faces, but also like over the years, newer faces coming out to the shows.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy too. When I see younger, like I remember we just played in Oakland in this a few months ago, and after the show I went and, I usually shake people's hands in the front row, and there's this kid there. He must have been like 12 years old. I shook his hand. I was like, it's so amazing to see that, right? And even guys that are in their 20s, that have discovered Sacrifice, love Sacrifice. That's amazing for us. We love that.
Which kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, like, you've got a show coming up in May with Repulsion Ancients. But now that, you've got Volume 6 coming out, do you have any more plans on playing any other shows this year that you can talk about?
Oh, yes, we will be playing more shows, but unfortunately, I can't share anything with you right now because nothing's set in stone yet. that we can talk about. But we have talked about doing a few other shows this year. Yes. So Vancouver will not be the only show we
Awesome.
play this year. That's just the only one we can talk
Awesome.
about
Okay,
so
so
far.
for everyone tuned in, just keep your eyes peeled to the usual places you do. And yeah, before I kind of wrap up, right? Because I know we can keep doing this chat and all, but I have to kind of ask you a question which I've been thinking about, right? Which is when you first
Sure.
started out, right? And especially you talked about being a teenager and stuff like that. How do you kind of reflect at that entire journey that you've had of almost like 4 decades, right? I mean, the fact that in 2025 you're releasing new music, uh, performing live still. How do you kind of reflect on that entire journey?
Yeah, I mean it's it's a really hard question to answer. I think I look back to the time when we weren't playing, before we reformed in 2006. There'd be some times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd have a dream about playing live. I really missed it. And I guess we all did. Um, I was still involved in music, but it just wasn't the same as being in Sacrifice and with the guys that, we grew up with and went through so much with, the four of us. And here we are, we're still together. Um, yeah, it's pretty mind blowing that, I okay, put it this way. When I was 17 or 18 or whatever, when Torment and Fire, our first album, came out, I could have never imagined that I'd be this age releasing another album. Um, so I feel extremely fortunate and, just glad we can travel the world and still play shows. It's amazing.
Awesome. And I wish that continues furthermore. Thanks so much, Rob, for taking time out and speaking to me. Really wish you guys all the best with Volume 6. And yeah,
Hey, Peter, I want to thank you too for taking the time to do this talk with me, and I've enjoyed it, and it's great that you've lived here before and you know the history of Toronto and stuff. So that's really cool too. I really appreciate the interview, Peter.
awesome. And that was Rob Urbinati of Sacrifice. Do check out their album Volume 6. It's out right now via Cursed Blessing Records and High Roller Records. Leaving the links to both in the show notes. Got a cool episode coming up very soon, probably in a few days. Do stay tuned for that. Hit subscribe or follow on the podcast platform that you're listening to this episode on, or follow me on social media. I'm Trendcrusher. I'll see you all very soon. Cheers.